Wall Street's top cop, Preet Bharara. He is U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York.
It occurs to me that this is what it must feel like to be a Kardashian. And you're probably wondering that if I were a Kardashian, which Kardashian would I be? Obviously, I would be Kanye.
Rajaratnam found guilty on 14 counts.
Poster child for Wall Street greed, Rajat Gupta, 1 count of conspiracy, 5 counts of securities fraud.
I just wanted to apologize in advance that I don't have enough subpoenas for all of you.
That may have been a joke, but the so-called sheriff of Wall Street is continuing his war on insider trading.
Matthew Martoma being arraigned. This is the most lucrative insider trading case ever.
Michael Steinberg arrested on insider trading charges.
We're not afraid of bringing any kind of case against anyone, no matter how big they are, how wealthy they are, or how prominent they are.
Well, there's a video for you. Okay. Let's get right to it. Preet. CEO just gets a call, has to come see you, worried about insider trading. You've told him, listen, come in. Is it good for that CEO to start by making a joke and say, hey, Kanye? Or what would be the best way to make it so that you might think that he shouldn't be indicted?
I'm glad you always begin slowly, Jim. First of all, I don't make that call. I have people who make the call. Depending on what you have done, and depending on, and given the track record that we have, if your CEO gets contacted by our office, you might want to figure out if that's a good time to check whether or not you have an extra pair of underwear, because of the seriousness with which we take our work. And obviously, I'm kidding, but
I don't know if you are. I've been reading the stories. You need smelling salts if you knock on knock on the door.
We're not regulators. We don't bring. Sometimes we do, but generally speaking, when we're talking about criminal prosecutors reaching out, we're talking about a criminal action. And by the time we have made contact and we've decided to go overt with respect to an individual or an institution, it's probably pretty bad news. And we only do that in very serious circumstances. And it's not a laughing matter. It's not a joking matter. And people who run, whether it's a hedge fund or a bank or some other kind of financial institution or a company that makes any product, needs to take it very seriously. And the most important thing you can think about doing at that moment is to think about how forthcoming you should be and to cooperate, because the history is that those who come forward and are voluntary with information, volunteer information, do better than those who don't. And more importantly, for hopefully the people who are in the audience here today and people who are watching on television, is to think to yourself, what are the things you should have been doing, and asking yourself and thinking about in the years leading up to that phone call, because you want to avoid getting that phone call in the first place.
Okay, we can't really directly talk about SAC Capital, I know, but talk about phone calls. Are the phone calls too late? My understanding from the conventional press is that if you're going to bring some of these cases, the statute of limitations is up, and if you better do it this afternoon or it's over.
I'm not going to talk about any particular case, not about the institution you mentioned or any other institution that people are thinking about. The other thing to keep in mind is, a lot of people think that they know what we're investigating and what's up our sleeve, and most of the time they don't. And there are a lot of institutions that we're looking at, and people have no idea that we're looking at them, because as a general matter, we don't talk about our cases, we don't talk about our investigations, because it's not appropriate to do so. What I'll say as a general matter, there are a lot of, and it's entertaining, there are a lot of armchair lawyers and armchair prosecutors who think that they know what the legal theories are that we can pursue, and think they know what the statute of limitations issues are, and think they know what the strictures are, and often they're quite wrong. Just to give you a couple of examples, a lot of people talk about statutes of limitations being limited to 5 years in particular cases. The bank fraud statute has a statute of limitations of 10 years. If you're talking about wire fraud or mail fraud, it's typically 5 years, but if it affects a financial institution, it's 10 years. When you're talking about ongoing activity and ongoing misconduct on a conspiracy theory that elongates the statute of limitations, what people have not appreciated as much as I can tell from reading the press, Dodd-Frank, which was enacted 3 years ago today, I believe, enlarged the securities fraud statute of limitations from 5 years to 6 years. So, we have a lot of legal theories that we can pursue. We don't talk about those generally, but I think a lot of the armchair prosecutors who sit around and speculate about the cases that we're going to bring and the ways in which we're going to bring them are often fairly wrong.
All right, let me understand. In other words, there are cases in the press right now which time and again we have told, you're almost done, you're out of time. That's not the case. You can bring cases for multiple years from now.
All I'm saying is that depending on the circumstances of the case and what the facts are and the legal theories, that stark statements by armchair prosecutors in the press are often incorrect.
All right, fair enough, because I think that that is exactly the opposite of the perception of what most people in this room feel. Don't rest if you did something 5 years ago.
Well, you should never. People shouldn't rest. People shouldn't be waiting for time to run out. That's not a good way to behave. And when right? So
All right, fair enough. All right,
I don't even wear a watch, actually, just for the record.
Timeless. Yes. All right, timeless indictments. 3 senators last week introduced a version of Glass-Steagall. They want to break up the banks. Why? Because they think banks are too big to fail. More importantly, they think the bank CEOs are too big to jail. Did Arthur Andersen's shutdown take that away from you, or can you indict individuals and large banks, including ones that have done multiple instances of violations?
I don't think anyone is too big to indict. No one is too big to jail. I think, and I've been saying this for years, there's enough moral hazard in the industry, and if you give people a blank check and you tell people that they have a get-out-of-jail-free card because of their size or because of their interconnectedness to the economy as an absolute matter, that's a very dangerous thing, and we should never do it, and we don't do it, and we don't believe that, and I try to say as often as I can that that is not the case. That said, you have to be mindful of collateral consequences, and it may be the case that if you have a gigantic institution, whether you make toys or you're a financial institution and you have 100,000 innocent employees and you make a good product and there's one bad guy at the company, we actually have a legal basis to indict the company. But depending on the industry, if that is an institution that will go out of business and you'll unemploy 100,000 people and shareholders will lose billions of dollars in value and the economy will be disrupted, you have to take that into account.
Even if they're guilty as hell?
I said you have to take that into account. And if you're talking about an individual at a 100,000 person company, that's one thing. If you're talking about an analysis of the factors that we are required to take into account under Department of Justice guidelines, including the pervasiveness of the conduct, whether or not they are first offenders, whether or not they have learned lessons from the past, whether or not they have cooperated fully, whether or not they've taken measures to improve themselves, all those things you take into account. But I will tell you that you will, I think, see, and we are thinking about, and I hope people appreciate that we are thinking about, bringing holding institutions accountable, not just individuals accountable, because that's what sends a message of deterrence. And you can, on the one hand, it's perfectly appropriate to say the particular bad guys who commit crimes in an institution should be held accountable and should go to jail if that's appropriate. But at the same time, I think people need to understand that there are appropriate circumstances in which institutions are blameworthy also, because they either looked the other way, or they encouraged malfeasance, or they didn't stop malfeasance, or they have allowed malfeasance to happen time and time again, and they get a slap on the wrist, and they pay a penalty, and they don't have to plead guilty, and that's not always correct.
So you could look at what the SEC is doing. You could say, you know what? I've had it. That's 3 strikes. You're out. I'm going in.
All I'm saying is, if you're an institution that has, on multiple occasions, committed misconduct, and the first time you get a fine, the second time you get a fine, and the third time you get a fine, at some point, you have to be held responsible in a more serious way. Otherwise, you don't get the message. And when institutions are making unheard of profits from before, in order to have a deterrent effect, in order for people to understand that there is some pain that's involved in committing crime and allowing crime to be committed, and you don't learn from those lessons, there has to be some extraction of penalty there, and that's often going to be, going forward, I think, a criminal penalty.
Jamie Dimon said to me last week after they reported the quarter at J.P. Morgan that there were individual bankers who were bad actors, and he was surprised they weren't prosecuted, that they weren't punished. Now, you got the statute. You just gave us a word on the statute of limitations. The incidents that occurred in 2007, 2008 are fair game. Some of these execs at banks, should they fear what you're doing right now in your office?
Yes.
They should.
No, look, people should be fearful of bad conduct that they've committed catching up with them. People should have a healthy respect and fear of the law, because that's what causes deterrence. And if you have done bad things and you're just looking at the clock to see if you're safe and you're going to have repose at the stroke of midnight on a particular day, that's not a good way to conduct yourself. And people should be afraid that bad acts that they've committed in the past are going to catch up with them.
You talked about your office calling in people, not necessarily you. Are there people in this room who would be shocked at some of the names, some of the people who've been getting in the back door lately from big banks that did things 4 or 5 years ago where everyone here probably thinks they're scot-free because they thought the statute of limitations made it so you couldn't bring them?
First of all, no one goes through the back door. Everyone comes through the front door. They might be. I don't know how much people are reading.
Well, I mean, you had a suitcase of subpoenas last year. You said you had. I mean, where's the no subpoenas this year?
Yeah, I had a lot of subpoenas actually, and on the way over here, I ran into like 6 corrupt politicians. So I ran out.
All right, let's talk about behavior change. I know that corrupt politicians are the same, but it seems like to me that there are fewer tips. Or perhaps people are using better technology. My daughter and I Snapchat, disappears in 3 seconds. Can the bad guy Snapchat go buy Leap Wireless at 3:45 on Friday and get away with it because you don't have the technology to stop it?
I don't even know what you're talking about. Have your daughter call me.
It's a technology that allows the message to disappear in 3 seconds and supposed to be untrackable.
Yeah, look. I always learn when I come on this show.
Fair enough. Snapchat.
Technology. Look, to answer a different way, technology is a big deal, and insider trading is a crime of communication, and other crimes are often facilitated by communication, and law enforcement is always trying to take the lead and always trying to stay a step ahead of the bad guys, and to the extent people can figure out ways to communicate either by IM or Snapchat or some other method, law enforcement needs to think about that. And one of the reasons why we engaged, my predecessors decided, and we continued and defended the use of wiretaps in insider trading cases for exactly that reason, because it becomes too easy for people to get away with their crimes, and we need to be thinking about those things. But nobody should feel safe because they're using a particular method of communication, because separate and apart from all of those issues, I'm not sure that you would flip on your daughter or vice versa, but we have case after case where there was not wiretapping involved. But human beings are human beings, and if we get evidence against a particular person, people have to be worried not only that the government is listening in real time, but they have to be worried that their counterparty in the crime, their partner in crime, will come to the government and reveal all the criminal activity that you've discussed and that you've engaged in, and then you can be prosecuted for that as well. So nobody should feel comfortable, no matter what method of communication they are using.
Okay, let's speak hypothetically about a situation involving no wiretaps. Let's say I go back into the hedge fund business. I decide to hire really good people, and I set up a compensation system where they make fortunes if they get their ideas right. I then tell them that they are not to get illegal tips, and they are frozen, so don't seek them. And I say, I never want to hear about it. You've been warned. You tell compliance to warn these people. And yet these same people, whom you do not know what they are doing, trade on inside information and tell you that they had a good fundamental reason to buy. If I set up my hedge fund and I set up like that, could I be indicted? Should I be indicted? And would I be convicted?
Can we go back to the Snapchat? Look, everything depends on circumstances, right? And there are lots of situations in which, compliance programs are simply lip service, and they're on paper, and nobody actually cares, and everyone understands that they're not to be followed, and they're just to be used in a conference room with prosecutors when you say, don't indict us because we have this thick compliance program, and people understand what that means. And in particular circumstances, there are cases where people are blameworthy and culpable because they've allowed things to happen, or they had knowledge of things that were happening because they used code words when they wanted inside information, or for other reasons. It depends on the facts and circumstances. It's not always going to be the case that you're going to be able to charge everybody who you think is responsible for something, because people are smart about how they insulate themselves. That's true in the mob. That's true in government when you have public corruption, and it's true. There are cases where people are blameworthy and culpable because they've allowed things to happen, or they had knowledge of things that were happening because they used code words when they wanted inside information, or for other reasons. It depends on the facts and circumstances. It's not always going to be the case that you're going to be able to charge everybody who you think is responsible for something, because people are smart about how they insulate themselves. That's true in the mob. That's true in government when you have public corruption, and it's true at hedge funds, and it's true at financial institutions. People are smart.
The hedge fund I just described sounds like a classic RICO act. There's conspiracy going on. Multiple people get indicted at that hedge fund. They do not flip on the guy who's at the top, but it's basically a criminal enterprise. At what point is it not a criminal enterprise if this many people have been indicted?
It's a hypothetical, right?
Totally hypothetical. Talking about my hedge fund that I'm going to start after my contract's over.
Look, Again, everything depends on circumstances. And I said before, there are institutions that we're looking at, and there are ones that you haven't read about and you're not thinking about, that we are thinking about bringing an action against. And we hear from companies, whether they manufacture products or whether or not they trade in stocks, to figure out whether it's appropriate to bring a case against the entire company. Look, it's a rare use of our power. We have a lot of power to bring cases like that, and we don't do it a lot, in part because of the lesson of Arthur Anderson, in part because we care about what the interests of justice require, and we care about collateral consequences. But there are circumstances in which it's appropriate to do, particularly when you have continued malfeasance over time among a large number of people. It can be the case that it's appropriate to bring action against the institution itself, not just the individual, so people learn from that.
Hasn't happened yet.
The day is young.
Fair enough. Subpoena power, you talked about it last year. There's a guy who's probably going to be elected. He's going to have all the subpoenas he wants, Elliot Spitzer. When he brings a case, say, on behalf of the city, which he believes there's insider trading because the city has a position in that name, you going to sit down with him, or is he just going to be able to do what he wanted, which is what he did to the SEC the last time?
He was your roommate, right?
He was across the hall from me. That maybe is not that relevant.
Look, we work with public officials all the time. We work with the state IGs. We're going to work with the Moreland Commission that was just appointed by Governor Cuomo. We work with district attorneys and people who are doing good work and who want to work with us and are capable of unearthing bad things. That we have a responsibility for policing, just like they have a responsibility for policing. We work with them and we do cases together all the time. So
you're not worried about a hijacking situation?
I don't worry about hijacking. No.
All right, fair enough.
Should I be worried about hijacking? I don't think I should.
I don't know. I did a lot of work with Elliot the first time around when he was running for state attorney general, and I don't think he really cared for what the didn't really care what the U.S. attorney was doing or what the SEC was doing, because he had an agenda. Different agenda.
We do what we do. We keep our heads down and we do our work, and that's what we'll do no matter who's in office in whatever position. People have come and gone in the 4 years that I've been the U.S. attorney, and people will come and go for the remaining time that I'll be U.S. attorney, and we work with anybody who's prepared to work with us.
Okay, fair enough. You talked at the beginning about the press not being that great. They're playing the parlor game. They're trying to figure out when. They're trying to figure out who. What should the press be doing? And do you ever pick up the papers and say, like, for instance, Jim Stewart, my friend Jim Stewart wrote an article that said, how many times does a particular bank have to do wrong before the U.S. attorney acts? Do you look at the Enterprise reporting, say that Eamon Javers has been doing, Fab's reporting for CNBC, which basically says that the playing field's not level, and you just pick up the phone? I know it's a blunt instrument, but if you pick up the phone, you can make policy even if you don't want to.
Yeah, well, going forward, I think I'm going to Snapchat with these reporters, because that's apparently the way you do it. Look, the press is incredibly important. I think the press helps democracy. I think the press helps America. I have said in the public corruption context, and I'll say also in the financial fraud context, that reporters who can do investigative work and shine a light on bad activities, that's really important. And we have brought cases in the past, and other prosecutors' offices and regulators have brought cases because sometimes it's the press that hits upon some bad conduct. It was the press that pointed out that members and staff of Congress may not be susceptible to the same insider trading laws as other people, and that law passed like a hot knife through butter. So it's important. At the same time, though, my worry is that the press is not as responsible as it always needs to be. We're prosecutors. We have a lot of power, and with a lot of power comes a lot of responsibility. And the same is true of the press. I mean, the press is the only private industry, as I remember, that is actually mentioned in the Constitution. It is fraught with a lot of responsibility, and I think a lot of people in the press, most people in the press, do a good job. What I worry about in the financial press is that there are a lot of people who think that the best scoop to get and the best thing to report on is to say 8 minutes before it's happening that so-and-so is going to be indicted, or so-and-so is going to be charged, or so-and-so is not subject to a particular statute of limitations, which I guess is interesting. It's fun reading. But A, it's not always right. B, it sometimes destroys reputations when they shouldn't be destroyed, and mistakes are made. And the reason we're careful about what we say publicly is precisely that reason. And I think better energy would be, the better way to expend energy often would be, and there's a lot of great reporting like this, to show where there's bad conduct happening, where there's fraud happening, where people are not paying attention to things, whether it's in the pharmaceutical industry or the hedge fund industry or somewhere else, so that we can then bring our efforts to bear on that. And simply being a day ahead of who's going to be arrested and at what place, and having cameras outside, I'm not sure that accomplishes a lot for the public.
How do these stories appear? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've read the story that, let's use elephant in the room, that Steve Cohen, that you've made a deal and the deal has made it so there will not be a prosecution. Do you laugh when you read those articles? You say, like, wow, this is unbelievable. From thin air. I can't believe I'm reading this.
Yeah, again, not referring to any particular case.
Yeah,
I laugh a lot. And I like to laugh. Laughing is good for the soul. And I'm somewhat quizzical about it. Every once in a while, I send an email to folks in recent times saying, I don't understand how this is being reported because I'm pretty confident that I'm the one making this decision, and I'm pretty confident that I haven't made a decision on this, so I don't know how it's being reported that way. And there's every once in a while you have, I apologize for using this term, there are weasel words in the story, and someone writes a headline that makes it sound like a decision has been made or a thing has happened, and you read in the body of the article, 8, 9, 10 paragraphs down, it's likely or unlikely that something's going to happen, and that tells me that it's not someone from my office who's talking about it. It's people who are engaging in speculation. A lot of people know about cases. There are, and sometimes it's the other side. Sometimes people want to get ahead of a story, which is not to say that anybody is leaking in particular, but it's unfortunate that these things happen in the press. And like I said before, most importantly, and I don't know if there are reporters here, but you know who you are, who have reported that particular people are going to be arrested, and and they have not been because there was not sufficient evidence to do so, and they bear a responsibility for ruining reputations when they shouldn't have been ruined.
Well, is it possible that someone can say off the record to a journalist, I just met with Preet Bharara, he's giving me a pass? That Joe Cassano got a pass from AIG.
People can say what they want to say. All we can do in our office is to make sure that we keep our heads down, that we don't do anything inappropriate, that we're not leaking to the press. I mean, sometimes people suggest that we do, and, human beings are human beings, and you can never say with absolute certainty what people do. But if I ever found out that a prosecutor in my office was talking to the press about things that were not supposed to be talked about, that's the last time that person would wield a subpoena, ever.
All right. Do you ever get dismayed that that the shareholders end up paying for a lot of the expenses of cases that you bring?
Yeah, look, I mean, there are a lot of collateral consequences to cases we bring, not just in the white-collar context, and I appreciate that everyone gets very upset about the collateral consequences that are visited upon, generally speaking, in financial fraud cases, people who can cope with them. In narcotics cases and in gun cases and in gang cases, we have people where the collateral consequences are quite severe, where they have dependent children and they're the sole breadwinner of their family, and people become homeless because someone goes to jail, and it's a terrible thing. We take that into account, and we're sensitive to it because before we are prosecutors and before we're human beings, and we want to make sure that we're thinking about the overall interests of justice. But but no one is above the law, as you say. On the one hand, people say we should be, stringing everybody up and putting them in handcuffs, and on the other hand, people say, well, should the legal expenses be borne by innocent shareholders? It's a tough balance, and that's why we think about these things, and that's why certain kinds of prosecutions, need to be thought about very carefully. But at the end of the day, overall, for the public and for people to have greater shareholder value across the market over time, punishing companies that are bad and punishing individuals who are bad at those companies is better for everybody, even if every once in a while a little bit of harm is visited on some select shareholders.
Is it an odds game? Have you been in situations where you say, in light of the fact that I'm human, in light of the fact of what can go wrong, it's only 75% chance that I'm going to win this case, that's not enough, I'm not bringing it?
No, we don't do that. People every once in a while come to my office and say, well, we have some litigation risk here. And I cut them off very quickly, and I say, look, what we're in the business of doing is holding people accountable if we think we have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And some cases are stronger than other cases. Some cases are slam dunk. There's slam dunk cases, by the way, that are not won. I lost a couple of those when I was a line assistant because juries are made up of 12 human beings. You don't know how the evidence is going to come in. You don't know what kind of rulings you're going to get. And there are cases, people walk into court. I'm amazed that anybody gets convicted of anything. I think I might have said this before. I might have said it last year. 12 people you put in a room, they can't decide on what kind of pizza they're going to order. And to think that they're going to all decide on particular complicated counts in an indictment and vote to convict someone and send that person to jail, that's a heavy thing. That's why you always read stories. You often read stories about jurors coming out voting to convict or not convict, whether it's a financial fraud case or it's a hate crimes case, and they're crying in the jury box because it's a hard thing to do. We need to meet a threshold of belief of absolute belief that the person is guilty and that it's a righteous case to bring and the interests of justice are served by bringing the case. And sometimes we lose them, sometimes we don't. People would ask me, what would you have done if you had lost some, particularly large cases? We would have brought more. We would have brought more cases. And anybody who only wins is not necessarily bringing the hardest cases. And we've been very fortunate. We've had a good track record in a particular area. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's not we're not being paid. My salary and the people in my office, their salaries are paid by all of you and people who are less rich than you. And our job is to bring cases that we think are appropriate to bring, and sometimes you're going to lose them.
Okay, are there situations where you have called people in, people you've indicted, people you've convicted, who actually say, you know what, listen, I bought that stock because it turns out that the company's really undervalued, I've done a lot of work, I've never had that call, you're making it all up. There are people who are going to listen to David Faber in the next panel, have to talk to people about ideas, maybe one of those ideas is going to get a takeover, and they can say, you know what, I heard it at Delivering Alpha. You got it all wrong. I didn't have any inside information. These people ever do work and convince you?
We bring, as I said, we investigate a lot of cases. We don't bring every case that we investigate. And it would be inappropriate, when you begin to investigate a case, if you have your mind made up before you begin to investigate the case, you're not doing your job. That's inappropriate, and that's...
Well, Raj had a lot of good reasons why he did it. I mean, a lot of times I read it and said, well, that was a good call. Yeah, geez, that Sun Micro, that was really right. That was going to be a good quarter. You ever get blown away by the reasons?
That's one case I can talk about because it's concluded, and it was upheld on appeal by the Second Circuit recently. The argument in that case, and in a lot of insider trading cases, it's not that people didn't do homework. People did homework, but they cheated too, right? Some of the best baseball players in history who have been shown to have used body-altering steroids, no one says that they're not great athletes. No one says they didn't work hard. No one says they didn't go to the gym. No one says they didn't go to batting practice. They did all of those things, and then they cheated too. And you're not allowed to cheat. And no matter how good you are, if you're an A student, you're trying to become an A+ student, by cheating, by getting the test results in advance, that's a crime, and you're going to go to jail for that. That said, there are cases in which there is speculation and there is smoke around activity, and there seem to be peculiar and suspicious trades that happen at an odd time, and you ask yourself and you scratch your head and the SEC looks at it and maybe they'll refer it to us, and you take a look and it turns out, you know what, it all checks out, or it doesn't fully check out, but we don't have enough evidence to bring the case. That happens too. But in the instance you mentioned, it wasn't square.
It wasn't square. You knew it from wiretaps, or just didn't sound right?
The sum of the evidence.
Okay. There have been some cases that I believe maybe not have been brought now. Do you think that Skilling, you just got a reduced sentence, do you think that the U.S. Attorney would bring the kind of cases they brought against Enron?
Yeah, I wasn't involved in that. I wasn't involved in that case. All I'll say, and just repeating myself from before, I think there is a need to bring cases against individuals in a serious way and against institutions also, because I think a lot of institutions, that's why we have our civil fraud practice that is new over the last 2 or 3 years, so that a record gets developed of malfeasance. And it's not always going to be the case you can bring a criminal case, and it's not always going to be the case that you can bring cases against individuals, but there's a totality of circumstances with respect to an institution that just flouts the law and does it repeatedly, and I think there is a need for people to be educated about that and for deterrence to happen, and deterrence can only happen across an industry among institutions that are somewhat immune to enforcement actions because they make a lot of money and they're very large and they have a lot of power, but sometimes you need to do a little bit more.
All right, is there a tipping point where if I'm running a hedge fund, there's 6 guys you brought in, 6 guys you're going after, and at a certain point I just say, you know what, I got to go after Kramer. Let's use this, okay? Because if I brought in a bunch of guys, they're all guilty. He says he didn't know anything about it. Does it matter whether I knew? I mean, maybe I'm running an enterprise that shouldn't be run.
Didn't you already ask me this question?
Yes, but I'm going to continue to try because it's too big an elephant.
Ask me on Snapchat later.
All right, okay. Obviously, I'm not going to do well on that line of question. But I think if I didn't do it, what's the point? Got to try. Okay, you've been at this for a little while now. Let's talk about another question you want to answer. Okay, is it time to think about higher office in which you want to be?
I usually ask the question, so it's...
Well, I'll give you a shot. I'll give you some time. So do you want to be? Would you rather be the U.S. Attorney General, head of the Justice Department? Or would you rather be the governor of New York? Which one?
I like the job. I like the job I have.
Oh, yeah, but after you've done that one, which one would be a better job for you?
But I can do this, I think, for a while. I think it's going okay. Like,
Well,
you know something I don't know? Am I getting fired?
No, I just think you stick around, and then maybe some openings occur, and it might be a good thing to throw your hat in the ring.
I'm doing this job. This is the job I like.
You're just happy with the job right now, and we're not thinking bigger. We're not thinking about something else. This is perfect for you.
The job is pretty big, I think.
No, the job is huge, particularly for the people in this room. Now, are there some people in this room that you've brought in?
Yeah, that guy in the
I feel bad for that guy. Can we get the camera on that guy? No, I'm saying there's some big high-profile cases right now that you're working on that are going to knock our socks off.
I mean, I don't know what it means to knock your socks off. Our effort and our intent and what we do is not to knock anyone's socks off. It's to figure out where there's bad conduct going on and to prosecute it. And you know, we do a lot of talking about high-profile cases, a lot of financial press, and that's why I'm here. And there's a 24-hour network that's devoted to this. We do a lot of stuff that nobody hears about, nobody reads about, that are not covered on cable networks, that don't have to do with financial fraud, but is about public safety and about keeping New York safe and about keeping streets safe and making sure that kids aren't getting shot on their way to school and making sure that people aren't, voting for corrupt politicians. There's a lot of stuff that we do, most of which is not high profile. Every once in a while we have a high profile case, largely because the press makes it high profile. Every once in a while people say, well, why are you obsessed with so-and-so? Why are you obsessed with insider trading? At any given time, and I've said this before, I got a handful of guys, men and women, who are working on insider trading cases. I have 230 assistant U.S. attorneys in my office. Like, there's 6 or 7 people who are working on these things, and I got 223 who are doing other amazing, great work to keep New York safe and keep people's money safe, and that doesn't get heralded very much.
Well, in this particular audience, obviously, we're more worried about, people here are worried about who you're after next. Maybe that's the parlor game you don't want. You talk about lower profile cases. Sarbanes-Oxley passed this. It was a great opportunity to go after CEOs who signed documents where they didn't necessarily know that there was wrongdoing, but you had the right to go after them. What happened to that? Why don't people go after people using Sarbanes-Oxley?
Again, I can't opine on why a particular statute is not used more than people might have expected to be used, but the problems of proof and the problems of proving intent exist throughout the criminal justice system, and it's not always easy to bring particular kinds of cases, even though lawmakers may think they have passed, an easy, bright line law. And some things are better left to regulators because they don't have to prove criminal intent and they don't have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt to a unanimous jury. And that's all I'll say about that. But everyone should appreciate that we're always looking at every tool we have, and we're looking at all the statute of limitations issues, and we're looking at aggressive techniques. And I don't think anybody can say that the office that I lead and that I inherited has been anything less than aggressive, at least more aggressive than anyone else.
I'm going to give you the last word to this crowd. Something that they should know about your office. Something that they're doing wrong that you're not happy with.
Do we have another 20 minutes? No, look, most people are trying to do a good job. Most people are ethical and honest and honorable and want to do a good job. And the problem is that there are not enough people who realize that part of their job is to disable the bad guys. And all these frauds that we prosecute, and I say this all the time, they happen in large part because you got the bad guys who are doing them, but you also have good guys who didn't say anything about them. And because whistleblowers are not paid attention to, and because there's not a climate where people think they can elevate it, and it's all lip service, and people don't put their money where their mouths are, and that's a big problem. All these frauds, whether you're talking about the fraud at Galleon or at Bernie Madoff's firm or other places, people knew about it in advance, and they didn't do anything, and a lot of pain would have been avoided, and a lot of people would have been suffering less if good people like you guys in this room, not all of you, most of you, did something about it earlier on. And that's the big lesson that you learn in doing this job after 4 years.
Thank you, Preet Bharara.
Thank you.